Hold on to your butts.
Da-da-da.
Boop.
Welcome to episode 68 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast, joined as always by Mary, the Canadian Christmas elf who enjoys filling her own stocking with IPAs. I am just a broken toy given without batteries named Darren. Hey, Mary, how are you?
Oh my God, you're so much more than that.
I'm doing good. Thanks for asking.
God. Anyway, how are you?
Oh, that's fabulous. It's Christmas is in the air. It's not a snowflake to be seen, unfortunately, here, but certainly everyone seems to be in a pretty good mood almost. It is Tuesday, so you never know. But I think for the most part, that people are excited about it. Wait, today's not even today's not Tuesday.
I was just going to say, today's Thursday.
That's, that's what happens.
Oh, that's
what
why
happens.
I'm in a good mood then, right?
That's probably why you're in a good mood.
Yep.
Anyway,
maybe we should record on Thursdays more often.
Yeah, fine with me. Anyway. So how are you? What's going on? It's been a couple weeks since we did this.
It has
to get back in the old saddle again.
Yeah, it feels like it's been forever since we last recorded. But yeah, since we last recorded, we were back in the Burg again for a little visit.
We were
as well.
We
got to meet up with Tattooed Historian.
Good times. We did. We had a good time. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to get back down to God's country again.
Yeah, we saw We saw a few of our friends. We saw Tattooed Historian John Heckman, and we got to hang out with our friend Allie B a little bit too, which was awesome, and saw our friend Bill as well. So it was a fun time. Great to be back.
It was a good time. It was a great time.
And Gettysburg at Christmas, for those who have never been, you got to go. It is absolutely beautiful there.
It actually really is. They do it up right. It's a lot of fun. People are in a good mood. It wasn't too cold. It wasn't too wet. It was just right. So speaking of cold and wet, Mary, what are you drinking?
God, I am drinking Red Zone from Knockabout Brewery, which is in Cape Cod, and some very nice American brought me that. That's pretty awesome.
As a nice American.
So anyway, it is great, and I am drinking it out of my Iron Brigade mug because tonight we are talking Rufus Dawes.
There you go. Very cool. Very cool.
And what are you drinking?
I am drinking, it's from Collective Arts in Canada. Some Canadian person gave me this. It's called Stranger Than Fiction. And I am likewise drinking it out of my Iron Brigade mug because like you just said, we're going to be adding some iron to the old diet tonight, Mary. We're going to be talking about Rufus Dawes. How about that?
We are. And just to let our listeners know, if they want to go back and learn a little bit more about the Iron Brigade, which Rufus Dawes was part of, we did an episode about that with our friend Eric, who is also the author of Black Iron Mercy, which we would both highly recommend reading that book. It is awesome.
It certainly is. So it's a good time to talk about this. We're going to talk about him. So let's talk a little bit about the old background of Rufus Dawes. Mm-hmm. Rufus R. Dawes. The R stood for nothing. He just wanted an R. Perhaps he wanted to be a pirate. Who knows?
I read that. I thought that was so funny.
Strange to do that.
Like, okay.
He was born the 4th of July, 1838, which is I think that's Independence Day, Mary, here in America anyway. I don't know how you guys have up there. But it was fitting considering how patriotic that Dawes was. And we're going to talk about him throughout this episode. That's the one theme about him is he's a very patriotic fella. He was born in Malta, Ohio, a small town. Even today is a small town. There's less than 700 people in Malta who live there now. It's about 80 miles southeast of Columbus, Ohio. I don't know if you knew this, Mary, but he's the great-grandson of William Dawes. He's a guy who rode with Paul Revere around Boston one night in April of 1775 to warn of the British regulars coming, which led up to the battles of Lexington and Concord. So, again, he has a very historical past. Growing up, he spent a lot of time in Marietta, Ohio, near his grandfather. And his parents did split, so he split up his time. He lived with his mother, Sarah Cutler, for a little while before eventually moving in with his father, who lived in a town called Malston, Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm, and he moved there with his brother. He goes to school, I believe he goes to a school in Wisconsin, and then he goes to college in Ohio as well. So he's back and forth between both states quite a bit. And that's the one thing that I thought is unique about Dawes. You don't hear much about parents separating in the 19th century. So for him to do that, and at the time when there's not the transportation that we have today, that must have been quite a long journey for him to make between those two states to see both of his parents. And he's got a few siblings too. Like when he moves to Wisconsin, he's moving there with his brother. He moves there in 1855. He is going to be 22 years old at the outbreak of the Civil War.
It's amazing to think how young he was. We mentioned he went to a school called Marietta College. Go Pioneers, Mary, in Marietta, Ohio, where he graduates in the class of 1860. And then when he graduates, he does go back to Wisconsin to help work with his father's business in that town of Malston. And to what you just said, Civil War is going to break out. He's just 22 years old. Abraham Lincoln blows that conch shell, looking for 75,000 people to help squelch the rebellion. He immediately wants to join. the quote he uses, he felt it was a glorious privilege to aid and crush the rebellion. And like many, he thought it was going to be a little quickie. It was going to be a 60-day deal. And like a lot of people felt at the time. Well, 60 days though, but for that reason, he wanted to get involved early because he felt that if he didn't get involved, he was going to miss it. So he was chomping at the bit to get involved. But he went out over and above though. A lot of people just signed up; they want to join. He decided to raise his own company. So in Maulston, on April 25th, 1861, Rufus Dawes begins to recruit, and he quickly signs 48 volunteers at the drop of a hat to join the company. By April 30th, 5 days later, he's up to 100 guys. And they begin to meet at a place called Langworthy's Hall in the village of Mansion, Wisconsin, where naturally Dawes is going to be elected captain. So he's got 100 guys. He's going to be the captain. Now, again, he's waiting for the official word. So they're going to decide to call themselves the Lemonweir Minutemen. Since the nearby peaceful Lemonweir River was going to remind them of home, that's what he was going to do. So like many, they signed up for that service. And it reminds me a lot of like here after 9/11. There was a great rush of patriotism. And a lot of people I knew ran up and joined the service because they wanted to feel like they were a part of it. It's almost similar sort of to that regard, but he joined the military out of pure pride to put down this rebellion. He took it personally that they were trying to destroy his country that his great grandfather helped forge with Paul Revere. He wasn't doing it for a pension or any other reason beyond just patriotism and pride. He took it as a great honor. Now, because he was so badly wanting to get called up in the service, he busted his butt in those Lemonweir's butts hard. He felt he was going to drill them really, really hard, but he didn't have a military background. He didn't know what the hell he was doing, but he was going to try. He wanted to get involved early, like I said. He dispatched one of his guys, a guy named John Turner, to go to the state capitol in Madison, and he's going to go visit Governor Randall, and he wants to let the governor know that we're ready to go. Call us up. We're ready. Again, a lot of these people thought that this was going to be quick, and there was that big rush, right? There was one guy who was familiar with Dawes. It was a kind of an old codger in Wisconsin. His name was Captain Belfour. He was a British guy, and he was like the one voice of reason. And he was trying to assure Dawes that this war was not going to be quick. He told him, and he's quoting him here, he says, "Don't fret, young man. Your company will be needed. You have no Wellingtons nor Napoleons in this country, and no experience in a war. This is not a 60-day job." He speaks prophetically a little bit about the state of the Union. He's looking around here. This is an old British guy who fought. And he's like, listen, I'm looking at your army. You guys, this is going to be a real deal. So, bide your time. So June 1st, 1861, Wisconsin has got 12 official regiments signed up. Okay. And Dawes and his company are still on that sideline with their men waiting to get that call because that's how it worked.
Yeah. And poor Dawes is just like, he's kind of beside himself with this anxiety of wanting to get called up, and he said, he wrote his sister on, and he said, "I am captain of as good and true a band of patriots as ever rallied under the Star-Spangled Banner. The men expect and earnestly desire to go and wait impatiently their turn." So there's this impatience going on that they want to get up there. And as you said, there's this thought that it's going to be a short, just like, 60-day war. Dawes writes, "What seemed to most concern our patriotic and ambitious young men was the fear that someone else would get there ahead of them and crush the rebellion before they got there." So he is like chomping at the bit to go.
All I could picture is you standing outside the liquor store with 10 minutes till it opens.
That's exactly it right there.
Pacing back and forth. But that's how he wants to go. So filing the 29th of June, Dawes is going to get a word from a guy named W.H. Watson, the military secretary of Wisconsin, that the Lemonweir Minutemen were candidates to join the 6th Wisconsin Regiment, and they can begin to board their company on the state dime. So up for $250 a week, they're going to get to board these Lemonweir guys to await their orders. The key is they got to sign 3-year papers. So it's not a 60-day thing. They're doing the 3-year deal. They're going for the full thing. So July 6th, 1861, 2 days after Dawes is going to turn 23 years old, those 94 volunteers now, he's out of 94 of the Lemonweir Minutemen, are going to travel to Camp Randall in Madison, Wisconsin. They're going to officially join the 6th Wisconsin. Now, Camp Randall, Mayor, if you know this, it is located today on the site of where the University of Wisconsin football team plays.
Oh, nice.
Which is called Camp Randall Stadium. So if you're watching a game on TV, with Michigan beating them probably, you'll be able to see the actual area where these campers they train.
That's very cool.
So 6th of July, cool when you look at this because you can imagine they've spent months training these guys, right? They've got their own uniforms if they have them. They don't really know what they're doing, but they're full of pride. So on the 6th of July, Dawes' company is going to march into Camp Randall. 2,000 men of the 5th and 6th Wisconsin are kind of lined on the sides greeting them. kind of a welcome party. Kind of like, just imagine, how happy Dawes must have been. I imagine you at happy hour somewhere.
Oh yeah, exactly. You
Excited.
walk in there and angels are singing. It's kind of like when I walk into Foursquare and it's like, woo,
Oh
yay.
God, exactly. Everybody covers their face. But you know what? What's funny about Dawes is once he gets there, he looks around and goes, "Shit, man, I'm not as ready as I mean, right?" So,
Yeah.
so he's gonna real quickly. He's gonna realize how ill prepared his dudes are, right? So he realizes that he only taught them two marches: forward march and move by your right flank. That's all they knew, right? So when they marched, they moved into two ranks and they were tripping over each other and probably due to nervous
I'm
more than
imagining
anything.
them as those guys. What was that movie that we just watched? Was that Stripes?
Stripes,
That's
yeah, just picture
exactly how they
stripes.
were. That's
That's
exactly
how they
how
would
they
have been,
were.
right?
Yeah.
And the other thing too is they would, when they showed up, they must have looked like hobos because most of Dawes' men
Mm-hmm.
were dressed in the clothes of their professions. We're talking raftsmen, lumberjacks, clowns, fishermen. However they wanted to be dressed up in their real jobs is how they were dressed. And some actually wore white capes called havelocks.
That's
Imagine walking
amazing.
the armature with a white cape, and some wore straw hats. And so yeah, that's the scene from Stripes is probably very appropriate. And they're tripping over each other.
Yeah.
Now it's funny because Dawes, when he gets there, he's going to meet the adjutant of the 6th Regiment, a guy named Frank Haskell.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about, part of the 2nd Corps at
Yep.
Gettysburg with Hancock and the whole deal. Haskell is dressed to the nines in his full uniform. He's riding a horse. He probably looks like like an Old Spice commercial compared to these guys, right? And and you can see picture this Lemonware Minutemen just standing there, probably in awe of the whole situation.
Yep.
Right.
Well,
Now,
they show up and they
Haskell,
think they're hot shit, right? And then they show up and they're
exactly.
like, "Oh no, we're not."
It's like Apollo Creed in that Rocky movie. He shows up dancing, he gets
Yeah.
pounded. They got humbled pretty quickly. So what
Yep.
Haskell does, he has the Lemonwares march with a group called the Milwaukee Zouaves.
Mm-hmm.
The Milwaukee Zouaves were the best drillers and trainers of all the 6th. They were the absolute best. They marched with Dawes' men just to more show that contrast of how bad Dawes' guys were. So they must have been a little bit cocky when they got there. From there, Dawes is going to meet the colonel of the 6th Wisconsin, a great Commonwealth of Massachusetts guy named Lysander Cutler.
Yep.
We talked about in Gettysburg later on. We'll talk about later. He welcomes the Lemonwares in, gives them a great welcome speech, and he assigns them as Company K. So now they're officially Company K of the 6th Regiment. So in camp, Dawes is kind of feeling his way through, and he becomes really friendly with the commander of Company E, a guy named Edward Bragg.
Yep.
We'll talk about him later on. He's a future U.S. rep from the state of Wisconsin after the war, but we'll talk about him, especially when we get to Antietam. But these two are going to be kind of tied at the hip off and on throughout their careers, and they meet at Camp Randall to help set up their initial training for this Company K.
He finally gets to write his sister to tell her that he's finally made it. I can't imagine. He must have been so excited about this. And his sister seems to be his primary correspondent at this time. And he writes his other siblings too. And he tells her that my men are not more than half supplied with blankets. And as we have cold, drizzling weather, they have suffered. It is a new life to us all, but I hope we can get broken in without much sickness. And then at the time, they all had gray uniforms.
Right.
And he actually says he kind of feels bad when they get the blue uniforms. He's like, oh, really? The gray ones are really, really nice. So it's funny that they're in these gray uniforms. And it's on July 16th, 1861 that they are all mustered into 3 years of service.
But those gray uniforms, they paid money for those. Right?
I know. Yeah.
And then they get these blue ones where he says, and I quote, they were shoddy and sleazy.
Yeah.
That's the phrase he used
Sleazy.
to describe them. But okay.
Well, you got to think though, like, you have to like what that guy said to Dawes, that this is going to be a long struggle because you guys don't have the army. You can't, like, how quickly are these uniforms being made? That's why they're so like sleazy, right? They're being like just quickly mass produced, whereas these gray ones, probably time was taken with them and all that. So it's funny about that.
But their training continued in camp, and a lot of the other companies had a lot of fun with them. The 6th was made up of soldiers from all around Wisconsin, including Company F under a guy named Captain Hauser, whose company was made up primarily of Milwaukee Germans, okay, just German-speaking hard Germans. While watching Dawes try to march, one of the German soldiers said with his German accent, "Well, now they looks like one damn herd of goose."
Yep.
That was the phrase they used.
I was hoping you had that quote.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of that one.
And it's funny because Rufus Dawes, again, he had no military background, which is good and bad for the most part, but he doesn't know what he doesn't know. He's a captain of the company. He meets his paymaster, a guy named Simeon Mills. This is the guy who helped determines who gets paid the money or helps pay it out. He wants to know to Captain Dawes, why didn't you submit the name of your servant on the payroll list? And Dawes like, I don't have a friggin' servant. And Mills tells him, I think you certainly do, as regulations, wink, wink, require it. Servants got the captain an additional $13 a month plus 30 cents a day, so his normal salary of $68 per month will be $128 per month to help pay for your, quote, servant. So they were manipulating the system. So Dawes goes, okay. So he writes in his memoirs, and he says, I couldn't remember if my servant had red hair with green eyes or green hair with red eyes. And I happily pocketed the additional salary on behalf of the rest of the cap. I can only imagine, what kind of fun and games the employees of the DQ and Kincardine are playing, if that's how these military guys are. So they were creating a fake servant to get a paycheck for him, but the captain was getting, and all the captains were in on, even the paymaster. So when they brought it up, Dawes was like, okay, and he made up a guy. And that's exactly, so he made a little extra money on him. Say, good for him, right?
Oh my God, that's creative shit right there.
but Dawes guys, and it's funny because as they continued to drill, they did lose guys. They ended up losing 4 men in camp since they arrived. One of them they lost because he wanted to be a drummer, didn't know how to drum.
Yep.
The other wanted to be a fifer. Guess what? Didn't know how to fife.
That would be me.
So they didn't. That would be. Yeah, no question about that. Although he probably had determination when he tried, though. No question about that. He certainly did. By July 16th, you mentioned the 6th Regiment, all with 3 years papers, they're going to end up with 1,045 men for the 6th Regiment. Dawes Company K now is going to have 91 guys. Okay, pretty good. They're all sitting around this Camp Randall, and they want to go because the war is kind of started. A couple of days later, on July 21st, 1861, Mary, there was this battle called Bull Run. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I think we did an episode about it. I think we did an episode.
You were paying attention.
I
okay.
was.
And afterwards, Dawes and the rest of that 6th Wisconsin, they left Camp Randall, and they're going to be moving east. So they're finally out of camp, and they're going to get to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania on August 1st. They're kind of moving along.
Yep.
Dawes, in his memoirs, talks a lot about how the troops from Wisconsin were in awe of the Allegheny Mountains because they never saw them before.
Well, they would never have seen anything like that, right? Like, it's very different terrain in Wisconsin and in that area of the U.S. And to see those for the first time would have been like, whoa. It's like, and these are guys that if there had not been a war, a lot of these men might never have traveled outside of their home state, right?
No, exactly. And you can imagine like a little kid on the airplane for the first time in awe, right? And
or me when the Lickbo gets new gets new IPAs.
Darren, guess what? Right? But so they do get to Harrisburg, and what they're going from Harrisburg is going to be going to Baltimore. Now, Baltimore, if you remember, Mary, is a heavy pro-Southern sympathy type of city, right? These guys, again, they have no experience. When they got there, they're going to march the streets, and they don't have guns. They have something called a brick bat. They have a bat. That's the defense. Good. And so while in Baltimore, Company E, they end up getting attacked by a bunch of street thugs.
The plug uglies.
Yep. And so many of them are chanting Bull Run and Run Yankees Run. But it was the first time the 6th Wisconsin saw any hostilities because they hadn't seen anything, right?
Yep.
They're going to camp at a place called Camp Atwood. And on August 5th, the camp was attacked by protesters.
Yep.
And who actually engaged in gunfire with these guys. So it was kind of getting a little serious here. Now, nobody was hurt, but it was the first time that anybody would exchange fire with these guys. But Dawes did kind of laugh it off and say the protesters' attack was a roaring farce.
Yeah.
That's the phrase he used.
And he actually made fun of Kellogg over the battle of what became known as the Battle of Patterson Park. Apparently, Kellogg, he was also in the 6th. He fell into a hole and, quote unquote, swore a blue streak. So this guy sounds very familiar to me. And Dawes wrote in his memoirs, Kellogg was quick of blood, and it was not always safe to congratulate him as the only man wounded in the Battle of Patterson Park. And that's the one thing to note about Dawes in his memoirs is he has this great sense of humor.
He does, and he's one of these guys. He has a good sense of humor. He wants to fight, but he didn't know what he got himself into yet.
Yep. And
so that's that. And you're going to see, as we talk about this, we're going to see his mood change, right?
Oh, yeah. So, there's and it's almost like, in some ways, it's almost like overnight that his mood suddenly changes.
And you can see it happen. But a couple of days later, after this attack there, the 6th Wisconsin is going to get moved to Washington, where unlike Baltimore, it's a very pro-union type of city. So they're greeted, they're cheered.
Yep.
They camped at a place called Meridian Hill, which is not far from the present-day Washington Zoo and Howard University. It's right in the same area of town. So there you go.
There's friends.
There you go. But Washington in August is no picnic, Mary. It's hot, it's humid, it's miserable. Many of the men got sick with measles.
Yeah.
They were just basically unfit for duty. But here is where they get reviewed for the first time by a guy named Rufus King, the other Rufus in this talk. He'd briefly be their brigade commander, but Dawes referred to as a homely looking fellow. That's how he described Rufus King. Remember, King was a guy who at Second Manassas got the epilepsy and he missed. He's also the guy who helped track John Surratt down overseas after the conspiracy. So the Rufus King kind of beginning and the end. But Dawes, again, he's getting impatient. Although he's happy in camp, he wants to fight. He's hearing about these battles like Manassas and he wants to go. All they do is drill under the extremely strict Lysander Cutler, as well as the very popular Frank Haskell, who he loved and the troops loved.
Yeah, and it's and keep in mind, it's really, really warm because it's, it's summer and it's Washington, and Washington is, holy shit, if you've been there in the summer, that's brutal. There was a funny story I found that when they were reviewed by Rufus King, Dawes said it was enough to try the patience of a martyr, the performance of that contemptible band of ours. They played such slow time music that we passed the reviewing officer at about 47 paces a minute. We had to hold one leg in the air and balance on the other while we waited for the music. So I was like picturing that again, like Stripes, right? It's like these guys are just so not together.
Who knows if he yelled razzle dazzle or not? We'll never know, right?
That would have been amazing. I could see Dawes doing that.
You know what happens on August 26, 1861?
Yes, this is where Lincoln and McClellan.
They get a visit by the great George McClellan, Mary, who shows up. Dawes talks a lot about McClellan.
He's a bit of a McClellan fanboy. Like he wrote his sister that the general is a splendid looking man, just in the prime of life. The boys are all carried away with enthusiasm for him.
You know, the people on Twitter would say Rufus was wrong here.
Oh, no kidding, right?
We would.
Right?
We would. But so right after that, so soon after this is when the brigade starts to break up a little bit. Because remember when the 5th Wisconsin is going to get taken away. They're going to lose the 5th Wisconsin, but they're going to pick up the 19th Indiana. And the 19th Indiana is under command of Solomon Meredith, who we'll hear about later on. They're going to pick up that 7th Wisconsin as well. Now they pick up another Wisconsin, but they're no longer an all Wisconsin brigade anymore. Because now they get these Indianans in there. So they lose a little bit of that Wisconsin pride, but they pick up another one. So
they're still considered a Western. They're still considered a Western brigade, Western Brigade though.
So on October 6th, 1861, you can see the snail's pace of how this thing is going. This is how it was for them.
Yeah.
The 6th Wisconsin is going to finally cross the Potomac and they're going to go all the way to the Lee Custis House in Arlington. That's where they're going to go, which is about 10 feet over the Potomac River.
Yeah.
And they find themselves in an under division led by Irvin McDowell, who we talked about, of Bull Run fame. And he's going to make that Robert E. Lee his headquarters, that mansion at the top of the hill. That's where it's going to be. Now here, McDowell and Cutler are going to focus on trying to get rid of a lot of the crappy officers and continue to drill.
Yeah, they do almost like a purge. And I think it was, what was it like? It was 5 or 6 of them that were totally taken out.
They just wiped them, got the hell out, gone. And it was around this time, too, the Battle of Ball's Bluff had happened, right? So, and Dawes was upset because Edward Baker died. And Baker was in that 15th Mass, was brigaded with them for a very short period of time. So he started to see people he knows die, right? Which is going to be a common theme going forward. But he still feels helpless because he's sitting there. So they're camped in Arlington. Dawes continues to bounce off the walls as he hears these reports of these other battles. And he desperately wants to be involved in one, right? Because don't forget, too, he's still thinking this thing, even though Bull Run happened, he's still thinking this war is going to be quick. And he's going to spend the entire war sitting in camp, marching up and down to, to razzle dazzle songs. That's what he's thinking.
Yeah. Well, I can't imagine, he writes his sister and he says, a military life in camp is the most monotonous in the world. It is the same routine over and over every day. Occasionally we have some excitement when we review. That's it. And I can't imagine a guy as patriotic as him. And it sounds like, the other guys in the 6 are very much the same way. As you said, absolutely bouncing off the walls.
Well, they finally decide something to do with these guys. And so they end up moving to a Bristow station where their tasks are going to be involved in fixing railroads and fixing bridges. And that's going to be their whole deal, is fixing this crap. And you can only imagine these guys wanting to go. Oh, by the way, they get reports now of the Battle of Shiloh happening in Tennessee as they're sitting in Bristow Station swinging a hammer on a railroad track. This is a common theme. So they're finally going to march from Bristol to Fredericksburg to continue to help mending those railroads. And this is interesting because, there isn't much insight into Dawes, how he felt about slavery. At this point of what happened, you kind of gives you an insight to what he felt about it. While they're marching from Bristow to Fredericksburg, Virginia, similar to Sherman in that march to the sea, slaves start following the army. It starts to attack those runaway slaves wherever the army went. Some Virginia slave owners would contact the Union troops and go, by the way, if you see any slaves, please bring them back to us. And they're like, no, go screw, we're not going to do it, right? But Dawes would say about it, the only thing I could find he said about slavery, he said that about this whole situation about not returning slaves. The great question of liberty is working on its own solution. The right must and surely will triumph in the end. So he's pretty much saying this slavery thing is bullshit. When the Emancipation Proclamation happens later on, he's for it. So it gives you an insight into what he thinks about it, how he talks about it. He's not the most political person. He'll get Congress later. But you can see where his heart lies. But the fortune, and here's where everything is going to change. The fortune of his entire brigade is going to change on the 8th of May, 1862, when they get a new brigade commander, a hard-fighting guy from Philly named John Gibbon. Okay? And then Cutler is going to return to command that 6th Wisconsin. And this is when everything changes for them, right? Gibbon, he's no picnic, this Gibbon, right? So Gibbon wants his brigade to excel in every single possible way.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? Now, this is a guy, he's a former artillerist at West Point who literally wrote the book in 1859 on artillery.
The Artillerist Manual.
He is going to bust these guys' balls hard to turn them into what he calls Gibbon's brigade. Now, first thing he's going to do is get rid of those shitty uniforms. First thing. Instead of those fading and shoddy and sleazy blue uniforms that Dawes talked about, they're going to wear these big, long blue overcoats. They're going to wear white gloves. And they're going to wear something called a hardy hat, which you're wearing right now, except theirs are going to have a feather or a plume put into it.
I need a feather.
You could use a feather, I'd say. But that's the uniform they're going to wear. So now they're dressed to the nines. They feel good about themselves. They've been in service for about a year now, and they still haven't seen any action.
They still haven't seen anything, but at least Gibbon is starting to make them feel like, here they all the same. Some of the men didn't like the uniform at first because it was pretty cumbersome to put on. But he's giving them a sense of, I think, pride and we're all in this together sort of thing. And like Dawes says of Gibbon that he was thoroughly educated in the military profession. He had also had high personal qualifications to exercise command. He was anxious that his brigade should excel in every possible way. And while he was an exacting disciplinarian, he had the good sense to recognize merit where it existed. His administration of the command left a lasting impression for good upon the character and military tone of the brigade, and his splendid personal bravery upon the field of battle was an inspiration. At first, the men don't really get along with him, but then they obviously come to like him very much, especially Rufus Dawes. Even after Gibbon is not the commander, he's invited to their reunions, and it just shows what an impression he made upon those men. And I think he made them what they were, right? He's the start of that.
He was almost like they would just put an animal in a cage and riled them up to get them ready to fight. There's that story where they're camped in Fredericksburg and they get into some sort of fight with these rebels who are using the grave of George Washington's mother for target practice one day. They were firing bullets at the gravestone, and something happened. They were going back and forth with them. But, finally, the 18th of May, 1862, Dawes and the rest of Gibbon's brigade, they're going to get word they're going to finally advance towards Richmond, which caused immense joy. Because now they're like, finally, we're friggin' doing something. We're not building railroad tracks anymore. We're going. Dawes said, as soon as old Abe saw our brigade, he knew we could take Richmond, and he has sent us to do it. You're starting to see that bravado again, that pride, that fire that Rufus Dawes had as he headed into Camp Randall, right? Now, around the same time, don't forget, George McClellan's Peninsula campaign's going on, and it's in full swing. And old Abe, he's becoming he's becoming scared of Stonewall Jackson's presence in that Shenandoah Valley, remember? And so he's going to take McDowell's corps, he's going to send them from McClellan into the valley to go on that wild goose chase after Jackson, which has a trickle-down thing that goes all the way down to McClellan's, the Peninsula campaign. Gibbon's guys are going to be part of that. They're going to be involved in that. First thing Gibbon does, because don't forget, you had Stonewall Jackson had the reputation of being fast. That's how fast they move. He's going to have them lose their haversacks. So they got to walk 35 miles without knapsacks. They got to carry their coats, their shoes, everything with them in their hands while they're walking, which must have been brutal, right? That must have been quite a thing. And they were being toyed with by Jackson because Jackson was just running around. They captured a Reb one day And they said, and the Reb says, "Youans are pack mules and tied to Granny Lincoln's apron string. Weans is racehorses." That was the quote he
I
used.
read that today and I was like, oh
right?
my God.
Well, and that's how it was, though. They're just playing cat and mouse. So guess what happens again? They're stuck in Fredericksburg again. So it's on July 4th, okay, which is his birthday.
Yep.
Dawes is going to learn that McDowell, who he calls, and I quote, incompetent, got replaced by John Pope.
Yeah.
Okay, so things are changing. Speaking of incompetent, right? Early 1862, in August of 1862, the men are on the move again. And now they actually have a real military task. They're tasked to cut the Virginia Central Railroad. So Gibbons is going to lead them on a 30-mile march in this heat towards Spotsylvania Courthouse. And they're also going to learn that Jeb Stuart's cavalry is kind of advancing on Bowling Green with a large force, about 5,000 guys as well. So that they can, well, maybe this might be our chance finally. So Gibbon is going to meet with Colonel Cutler along with a cavalry commander named Judson Kilpatrick, Mary. And we go with him again, right? And it's going to be around midnight. They're realizing that they're separated from the rest of their supporting column. And they're still 7 miles away from this Virginia Railroad. Meanwhile, Jeb has got 5,000 men right up there, Savannah. So they're like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do about this? Right. So they're trying to decide, do we continue to the railroad or do we fall back? And they decide, friggin' YOLO, let's go for it. Let's go for the railroad.
Yeah.
And that's what they're going to do. But here's what happens, though. They get called back again because in 8-9, they are told they have to go head to a place called Cedar Mountain to support John Pope's Army of Virginia because the Battle of Cedar Mountain was underway.
Yeah.
So they're bouncing around. They get to the battlefield on 8/11, and for the first time, Dawes is going to start to see the carnage of war.
Yeah.
He's going to see heaps and heaps of Confederate dead, and his guys were tasked to bury them. So Dawes, he's seeing the price of war, and he calls it, quote, my first contact with the real horrors of war. And the horrors of war, really, little did he know, were just beginning. He has an itch to fight, and it turns into that be careful what you wish for very, very soon, because you just might get it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it took forever for Rufus Dawes and his guys, but specifically him, to finally see action. But when it does come, it doesn't stop, right?
Yep.
August 20th, 1862, Dawes and the rest of his brigade are going to cross the Rappahannock at the Orange and Alexander Railroad, where they're going to start to see rebel cavalry. Beyond the cavalry, they're going to see rising dust from the infantry. And that dust in the infantry is going to be under James Longstreet. So they're now we're in for it now, right?
Yeah.
They start to take artillery fire, which is going to become the Battle of Rappahannock Station, the first Battle of Rappahannock Station. And it was here that Dawes is finally going to see the elephant. This is the first time they're going to get involved. So Gibbon's brigade is going to be placed on the right of King's division under Pope's Army of Virginia, and they're going to begin to move forward under fire. Now, a year plus of waiting for Dawes for waiting is going to finally come to an end, and he's going to finally get to fight a battle in enemy country, right?
He is, and this is probably where you see him start to kind of that gung-ho guy that we saw, that wanted to fight, that wanted to be part of this, that was worried. This is where he probably starts to just, you see the pieces chipping away, right? It's a very slow thing that happens.
He was sky high in this one still, though, because his Dawes Company K, don't forget, he's still just commanding a company. Yep. He's ordered to cover the front of the brigade. So they're going to be in the front. The 6th Wisconsin overall is going to capture 1 rebel lieutenant and 2 privates. Now, the battle was inconclusive overall. It wasn't really much. But the 6th saw their first glory on the field, and they were jacked. They represent themselves well. And so the beat goes on now. From Rappahannock Station, they're going to start moving towards Warrenton, Virginia. And on the 20th of August, they're going to head towards the town of Gainesville. Mm-hmm. And they're going to see large numbers of rebel prisoners starting to appear here. But they're taking fire. And McDowell feels that this fire is from the rear guard of Stonewall Jackson's army, who they think is in Centerville, Virginia, okay? And so McDowell's Corps, under Rufus King's division, is marching in that direction on the Warrenton Turnpike, and they're waiting for them in the woods is not the rear guard, but it's the entire Jackson left wing, right?
Exactly.
And this, of course, we know is the Battle of Bronner's Farm. They're going to find themselves running into the teeth of the Battle of Bronner's Farm, also known as the Battle of Gainesville. Now, this battle is the one where it gets bad. Dawes is riding on his horse with the 6th Wisconsin, while the 7th Wisconsin is being supported in the 2nd Wisconsin. They're all basically getting pushed back once they get in line. The Rebs start to get pushed back a little bit, and the Wisconsin guys are all cheering. Dawes guys were lucky because the 6th was on the right-hand side, but they were kind of in a low ground area.
Yep.
And so they didn't really take too much fire. It was this battle that Lysander Cutler got shot twice in the leg. So he gets shot. We're not going to go into too much detail of the Battle of Bronner's Farm. We have a whole episode about it. We'll focus on that. But suffice to say, the 6th Wisconsin is going to take their lumps. They're going to lose 72 guys out of 504. Dawes and his regiment, they're going to end up spending the rest of the night wandering the field looking for dead and wounded, right? Dawes talks in his memoirs about the sounds of the groaning, begging for water at Bronner's. This was the fight that he imagined in his head. This is the battle he said that they've been yearning for, right? But he ends up seeing a lot of the post-battle stuff again. And to your point, it all starts to chip away at him, right?
Yep. Rats. It does. And you think about how you always have to remember how he was at the beginning of this, how gung-ho he was. And it was kind of like one of those things where, are you looking at this through rose-colored glasses? I don't know if that's the right thing to say about this, but when you see the aftermath of it, and Dawes in his memoirs, and we'll talk about this when we get to Antietam, is very descriptive of some of the stuff he sees in battle, of what is happening. And I think it's to convey to the reader the horrors of war, that he went into this thinking this is going to be an adventure. This is going to be like, I'm going to save the country kind of thing with everybody else. And that's why he wanted to get there, because he wanted to be part of that saving the country. When he sees that aftermath, I mean, when you're tasked to burial duty, I just think of the scene it's in one of Jeff Shara's books about the Battle of Shiloh, and the character of Bauer is assigned to burial detail. And it was so horrific that a lot of the men started drinking during it, because it was just such a terrible thing to do, to have to bury the Confederates if you're a Union, but to bury your own people as well. Not a good thing. Right?
The other thing that Dawes does is he's very opinionated and vocal about how he feels about his superiors.
Right? Oh,
he
is. Yes.
So when Dawes gets back to Manassas Junction after this Bronner's Farm, he's pissed off at Pope's battle report, who feels he didn't do his men justice in the battle.
Oh, he's been pissed off at Pope since the beginning. He refers to like Pope. He says, like, when Pope made that proclamation, Dawes calls it the bombastic proclamation.
Yeah. I mean, Dawes was also pissed off at McDowell, who he says was, and I quote, lost in the woods the entire battle because he wasn't there. But he also says, in contrast, he says, Jackson had a clear purpose and full control of the fields, which of course is a direct passive-aggressive shot at his superiors, especially McDowell, who was nowhere to be found. He says, the best blood of Wisconsin was poured out like water, and it was all spilt for naught, right? So he writes about this battle. He said, Dawes writes about the Battle of Bronner's Farm. It was fought against a background of blunders, imbecilities, jealousies, and disasters in the Pope campaign, in bright relief of the gallant conduct of our heroic leader, John Gibbon. So he's basically saying Gibbon was great. Everyone else was a disaster in this. Now, of course, Pope is going to double down on this battle, the Battle of Second Manassas. We're not going to talk too much of the details about that. The 6th Wisconsin is going to be forced to cover Gibbon's retreat in that battle. They only stayed behind because they didn't get the orders to retreat, because no officer had the guts to go tell them, because it was too dangerous to go where they were, so they got stuck there. Rufus King does credit the 6th in the Second Manassas. He says the 6th Wisconsin was the last to retire and saluted the approaching enemy with 3 cheers and a rattling volley. So they were earning their chops. They were no doubt about it. They were brave. Yep. The show kept moving for them. September 1st, 1862, they'd gone to Fairfax, Virginia, and then to a place called Upton's Hill. Now, this is the same day as the Battle of Chantilly on September 1st, right? Yep. On the 5th of September, he writes to his mother. Again, he's always talking to his mother. He's a mama's boy, this one, right? He says, and it becomes something more of a regularity. As these battles were going on, he tended to write to her more regularly as it went. Yep. And his tone and his bravado were starting to slowly change in his letters. He's seeing death up front with increasing regularity. Some of his closest comrades are being killed right in front of him, and it's clearly beginning to take a toll on Dawes mentally. And if you read the letters, you can clear. He writes, my dear mother, we have had a terrible ordeal. We were in battle or skirmish almost every day from August 20th to August 31st. I have been in my post at every single battle. The bravado is being watered down a little bit now. Yeah. He started to realize it. Now, if you remember how the mood was in Washington after Second Manassas, I mean, it was like my house after that Patriot game the other day.
I know what that was like. That was not a good thing. I don't even know if Love Actually would help that.
Going to double it down. And Bronner's Hill to Manassas too. There you go, right? So, but the mood was obviously really, really bad. And there was one funny story about Lysander Cutler, which is kind of funny. So Lysander Cutler, for some inexplicable reason, decides he's going to go to Washington and pay a visit to Edwin Stanton. Just because. Yep. After Second Manassas, right? Cutler's been shot in both legs, and he's walking on a help of 2 canes. Just imagine that, right? Cutler's going to walk into Stanton's office, and Stanton looks at him and angrily says, what in the hell and damnation are you doing here in Washington? And Collar responds, because he's a Massachusetts guy, Mary. He responds, if I had not been shot and a fool, I would have never have come here. Good day, Mr. Secretary. He storms out, walks
That's
out.
amazing.
Typical mass hole comment that I can be proud of right there.
That's awesome.
Going back to Upton's Hill, Gibbons is going to start to reorganize his brigade after Pope is bounced out of the Army of Virginia that gets disbanded. His brigade is now the 4th Brigade in the 1st Division of the 1st Corps under Fighting Joe Hooker. Dawes and his regiment are going to leave on September 12th, and he's going to write to his mother again, my health is good, another battle is coming, as he's realizing Lee's Maryland campaign is slowly starting.
Exactly. And the next big thing for them is coming up, and that is the Battle of South Mountain.
Just real quick, what's interesting is their march, though, right? How they got there. And that was really, really cool. The 14th of September, they're in Frederick, and Dawes and his men are learning that McClellan's back in charge. This is the first thing they've learned. And they are pumped. They are absolutely excited. The troops are cheering. Dawes says, we have a general now, and we will show the country what we can do. But going back to what they said before, he loves him some Mac. There's no question.
Oh, he's very pro McClellan, and I'm sure I think that was the feeling of a lot of the soldiers there. Like, McClellan is the general that you want because he cares about his men, right? He's also, really good at organizing, really good at drilling. And, the other thing too is that when General McClellan reviewed the troops way back on August the 26th, Dawes wrote, General McClellan pronounced our regiment one of the best in material, appearance, and bearing. We expect and hope to be in the first advance. And this opinion expressed by the commander of the army is, I think, of an earnest of things hoped for. So Dawes is probably carrying that memory with him too, of having this guy that, said, oh, you're one of the best here, right? McClellan cared for his men. And that's what you have to remember when you're looking at him. And Dawes conveys, that's Dawes' opinion. He's very pro McClellan, and for good reason too.
There's no doubt. So as they're marching, the 6th Wisconsin they're the ones who are in the lead, and they're marching down that national turnpike in Frederick while listening to these insults from these Virginia women as they walk by. Why are women so mean? Why?
I'm not mean, am I?
I'm not, never.
I don't ever yell at you, right?
But it's always funny. Whenever there's civilians hooting at the military, it's always women. I know the guys are probably fighting, but I always got a kick out of that.
Yeah. Well, that would be me.
Of course it would, Dawes and his men are going to see the slope of South Mountain that's 8 miles off in the distance. They're going to start to see smoke from the battle rising it.
Yep.
Now, it's cool because on the way to the battle, on the way down towards the mountain they run into a wounded lieutenant colonel from the 23rd Ohio who was hurt in the battle. And the man was the future president, Rutherford B. Hayes. Was the guy they run into, which is kind of cool. So it's funny how small world. The Battle of South Mountain for Gibbons' men would take place at a place called Turner's Gap, where the National Turnpike passes through it, and the 6th was selected to attack it, no question.
Yep, and they have quite the fight going up this hill against these Confederates. I think they're going up against D.H. Hill, right? That's where D.H. Hill is.
The absolute iron. So Dawes and his men, they're going to be laying in the grass in the sun, watching the rebel artillery. And finally, along with the 2nd Wisconsin guys, they're going to finally begin to climb that slope in 2 columns when they hit that rebel skirmish line, right?
Yep, and Gibbons going up with them on his horse, and he's urging them on, and he's urging them forward, and they keep going and going and going until pretty much darkness sets in. They can't do anything else.
Gibbons charging forward. The 7th moves up. The 6th is going to be following them. And they're firing into those Rebs in the woods, right? The Rebs are behind that stone wall. And the 6th is ordered to move in the double quick. At this point, Dawes is getting command now. He's getting command of that right wing of the regiment to fire into that woods. And the men are cheering. They're getting all fired up. His old friend, Colonel Bragg of the 7th, commanded the left wing at the time. And they're both kind of creeping towards the woods. So you think about it, these are guys who were kind of messing around in Camp Randall. Now they're game playing at the end of these flanks. So one Reb yelled at him, "You damn Yanks, we gave you hell at Bull Run." And a member of the 6th responded, "Never mind us. It's not McDowell after you now. It's Little Mac and Johnny Gibbon." So this goes to show how they feel about their leaders,
how well
right?
respected they are. Yeah, how they feel about them, for sure.
And you feel bad because what happens is, it's cold, it's getting dark.
Yeah.
Because this is all taking place really at dusk. The men run out of ammo, and they go to Gibbons and say, "We need some more ammo." And he says, "I can't get you any, but I'm going to relieve you guys. So just hang here, just, touch base, whatever you're going to do, but just hold this ground as best you can. We're going to relieve you." So it's now dark, and the dead and dying are all lying all around them. And because of the location, There's no stretcher bearers. They're all stuck up there, right? Dawes is going to write in his memoirs, the dread reality of war was before us in this frightful death upon cold and hard stones, the mortal suffering, the fruitless struggle to send a parting message home, in that final release of death, all the darkness were felt even more deeply than by the light of day. So he's describing these people trying to write notes home. They can't do it.
Yeah.
There's no one to help. Gibbons does send relief, okay? Most of the troops did get relieved around midnight, but no one came to get the 6th Wisconsin. No one came. So they spent the whole night there. They didn't leave till 8 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my God.
Shivering in the cold all night until the night of the 15th. A messenger from Edwin Sumner is going to tell them, Sumner tells them, I can't send men into the woods tonight. All my men are cowards in the dark. That's why he didn't send them.
Oh my God.
So for that reason, Dawes and the 6th spent the whole night freezing on the side of a mountain, right? Everyone knows that this battle earned them the nickname, the Iron Brigade, all that stuff we talked about.
And who knows if it was McClellan or Hooker who said it to each other, but apparently McClellan and Hooker were up at the HQ, and McClellan's like, who are those men? And Hooker's like, oh, those are mine. And one of them said, they fight like iron. And from there, they become the Iron Brigade.
Oh, so they definitely got a lot of accolades. Eventually they do finally get down from the mountain, and they start to push down that turnpike again. And this time, the loyalists of Maryland are cheering. They get to a place called Boonesboro, which is not far from Sharpsburg, Mary. And the locals are all cheering. They tell them that the rebel infantry was just coming through here with General Lee, and they are completely in disarray. And Hooker is going to tell them, Joe Hooker, that they have intel of their 40,000 Rebs gathered on a nearby ridge beyond a creek called the Antietam. Okay, so you can see where this is going.
It's headed right for the Battle of Antietam.
So 9/16, the day before, Dawes and his men are settled in the same woods just north of Miller's cornfield. And it's raining. It's a drizzly rain. They all know the next day's battle is coming, and they know it's going to be freaking doozy. They just know it, right?
Yeah.
And the impending battle and the rain is making everybody miserable. Dawes writes, nothing is more solemn than the period of silent waiting for the summons of a battle, right? Now, what they didn't realize is where they camped that night. They couldn't tell because it was dark, but when the sun came up, they were right in the middle of the artillery, right in range.
Yep.
So the next morning, they fall under artillery fire. Unbeknownst to them, they put themselves right in the middle of a shooting fish in a barrel.
Yeah, and this is where you start to see some of Dawes's very graphic details of this battle. And this is, again, the chipping away at what is happening to him. He says that Captain David K. Noyes, his foot was torn off at this one percussion shell that dropped, and another man in his company lost both arms. And again, this is from a percussion shell. And this is at the very beginning of the battle. Dawes says, this dreadful scene occurred within a few feet of where I was riding and before my eyes. So you think about that he's writing about this decades after. And he can probably still see it as if it happened.
Everyone only has so much tread on your mental tires.
Exactly.
Right? Until they go bald. And the more it's used, the more it fades away and the more in trouble you get themselves into. But they end up hiding behind a barn as a battle on Antietam starts.
Poffenberger.
Hooker's first corps, they're in Doubleday's division, Gibbons Brigade, and now it's Edward Bragg's regiment. Dawes is second in command of the 6th Wisconsin as a major in this battle, okay? Now, Hooker's corps is north of those west woods we talked about in front of Miller's cornfield, a few hundred yards away from that Dunkard church, right? They moved into those west woods and immediately started getting pounded. Battle of Antietam is underway. Now, to the right of the 6th was that Sharpsburg-Hagerstown Turnpike, right? When they start moving, Dawes writes, I marched forward and saw Captain Edwin Brown killed from Company E. Now, don't forget, Dawes is kind of giving orders now because Dawes ordered them to move forward. He writes, the spectacle of a young officer with uplifted sword shouting in a loud, imperative voice the order I had given him. A bullet passed into his open mouth and his voice was silenced forever. So now he's given orders, and his orders are getting people killed that he knows. He was close with Brown. He'll talk about him later on. The battle continues. The men scrambled into that cornfield as Colonel Bragg, who's now in charge of 6th Wisconsin. He's ordering his men forward. They're lying on the grass, watching the bullets whiz over their head. And it's at this moment where Bragg himself is going to be hit. And now Dawes is going to be forced to assume command of the 6th Wisconsin. Now he's in charge of the regiment. He's going to continue Bragg's order to move forward into that cornfields. And this is that mentioned Captain Kellogg, his line, where one of his captains, he says, they're being ordered to cross the turnpike into the cornfield. He yells to Dawes, please, Major Dawes, it's impracticable. The first is murderous. It's just, you can't do it. But they do it anyway. They move in and several men were shot down immediately as they crossed that turnpike into the cornfield. Just picture men are falling everywhere. The dying, Dawes said the injured were lying waiting and praying for death to come and take them away. And so the Battle of Antietam goes on. The Rebs finally get drawn back. Dawes is going to push forward to Dunkirk Church. The 6th Wisconsin is going to get driven back because the Rebs are going to get support. And there's that story where Dawes is going to grab that flag because his men are scattered. They're running. They're full gallop running from the Dunkirk Church back. He's going to grab that blue Wisconsin flag to rally his men, and he's going to gather about 200 of them back together again. Noontime, Gibbon's going to arrive. And I guess he's covered in black powder. What the hell he's been doing? He's covered in black powder, right? And he wants the 6th now to save 2 guns from Battery B of the 4th U.S. So they were being challenged by the rebels. And at this point, 280 men enter that cornfield, and 152 were killed or wounded already. That's how vicious this was. Dawes called it the most dreadful slaughter to which our regiment was subjected to in the entire war. But you know what happens? They support the guns, and they save them. Dawes is going to see who? He's going to see Colonel Bragg. So he's happy to see he's still alive, and they remain there at that battery for the most part for the rest of the battle. But after the battle, you read the quotes that he writes, and Dawes was clearly shaken at what he saw. There's no question, whether it be guilt from issuing some of the orders or just the visuals. But some of the quotes he had about this battle are ones that haunted him, and you could really, really see it.
Yeah, you absolutely could. From the ones that I read earlier, where he saw the guy's foot torn off and the guy's arms. And the one thing I thought of is that scene from Glory. You see the guy's head get ripped off. That's shit that Dawes would have seen as well. That's the exact scene I saw. It like I was trying to think, what is this like that I've seen in a movie before? Like how you said that opening scene of Glory at the Battle of Antietam,
or at the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, even.
Exactly.
Battles, right? He writes about the Battle of Antietam, about the dead. He writes, "The piles of dead were frightful. My feeling was that the Antietam Turnpike surpassed all manifest evidence of slaughter. I trembled with every step with fright," he wrote. "I rode through the narrow lane made by the piles of bodies swollen black under the hot sun. Friends and foe were indiscriminately mingled." So he's literally walking his horse through a little path that was created by pushing the dead people out of the way. That's what he's talking about. In the previous 45 days up to this point, they were engaged in battle in 11 of them. That's almost 25% of their calendars were in battle. Now, this comes from a guy who was itching a fight, who sat around for a year, and now he got thrown right into the meat grinder.
Yep. And he's beginning to realize that this is not the adventure that he thought it was going to be. No. And he's conveying that in his memoirs. And that's why his memoirs are so important.
Yeah, right. And he writes to Mother again on the 23rd of September. He's going to write to her, and you can see the toll of his mental fiber becoming evident more and more, right? He writes, "I have for a day or two been suffering from a severe attacks of a bilious sick headache, the result of these trying times. My best friend in the regiment, Edwin Brown, was shot dead, and Captain von Bichel was shot dead, and his Newfoundland dog lay upon his dead body." So this is what he's writing to his mother now. No more bravado, no more fired up, no more save the Union. And now he's writing about the stuff he's seeing, and you can see how it's changing. The war, though he was so anxious to join, was now destroying him from the inside. And it's very obvious that it was. By October, Gibbon's brigade is going to add that 24th Michigan under Henry Morrow. And October 3rd, Lincoln's going to visit. Shall I say Lincoln? He's going to visit Antietam, who Dawes called towering like a giant, is the phrase he used in scrambling.
Morale's not good, right, at this time? But I guess Lincoln visiting probably would have raised it a little bit.
No, I think it was probably not that great considering what had just happened, because don't forget what happened a couple of days later. They got rid of McClellan.
Exactly.
And that was bad. McClellan's gone, replaced by Ambrose Burnside. And now John Fulton Reynolds is now commanding his corps. Now Abner Doubleday is going to command Dawes' division, right? Dawes talks about how angry the troops were about McClellan being sacked. And he talked about how many officers were ready to resign on the spot that day. That's how pissed off they were.
This is something that you have to, when you're looking at how we view General McClellan, a lot of it is through the eyes of Abraham Lincoln, right? Or just kind of from the Lincoln perspective. When you look at it from Dawes' perspective and from this soldier's perspective, it changes it a little bit. And, we did that episode about that we were talking, like, you can't blame McClellan 100% for a lot of this stuff, but Dawes is very pro McClellan, and you lose that guy that has your back and that is taking care of you to this guy that you probably don't know him. I doubt if many of them knew who Ambrose Burnside was, and here he is, he's suddenly commanding your army.
Yeah, and things are going to really change quickly going forward. I mean, it's just one of those, change is going to continue by the end of the year. They were at the Battle of Fredericksburg. We're not going to talk too much about Fredericksburg, but they were there. Joe Hooker is going to eventually replace Burnside after that Bud March.
Yeah, which
James
which
Wadsworth.
Dawes is very happy about Hooker, because he described those days, after Fredericksburg with Burnside as some of the darkest hour of our struggle. What he had to say about Hooker was the Apollo-like presence of General Hooker, his self-confident, even vainglorious manner, his haughty criticism of others, and his sublime courage at the battlefront have combined to make his impressions upon the public judgment that obscure his most valuable traits of character and his best qualities in commander. With indefatigable zeal, he addressed himself to the task of reorganization, and if I may so express it, re-inspiration. Knowing that this is how Dawes feels, he feels like, oh, good. Like, there's this guy coming in and he's close to being what McClellan was, and maybe he can inspire us to get back to where we were before. So clearly they were at a really good place, and then McClellan's taken away from them.
Well, Dawes loved McClellan.
Yeah.
He loved Gibbon. He loved Doubleday, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he loved Hooker. This guy had a virtual XXX flag flying above his Wisconsin flag. look at the guys he likes, right? But he does, though. A lot of these changes are going to happen. So jump ahead real quick to March of 1863.
Yep.
Dawes is going to get a break. He's going to finally get a furlough, right? And this is courtesy of a lot of the Hooker furlough programs, right? So Dawes is going to get a 15-day furlough. He's going to return home to Marietta, Ohio, and he's going to be asked to speak at a local courthouse on the 16th to a huge crowd who hung on every one of his words, right? I'm surprised he did that, to be honest, because, last thing you want to do when you come back from a break is talk about, you go on vacation, you want to talk about work. It's kind of one of those deals, but he certainly did. At this point, Dawes felt really good about the Army. They had plenty of food. He loved Joe Hooker, like you said, because he fed them and he reorganized them.
Yeah.
They got the Dairy Queen gift certificates, the whole deal, right? He spoke highly of the Emancipation Proclamation. We hinted at earlier. He said the Emancipation Proclamation gave everyone a test of their loyalty. That's how he described it. Mm-hmm. So what are you fighting for now? Well, where's your loyalties lie, right? He hated the Copperheads. He called the Copperheads traitors who go down in history with infamy. So those people in the North who supported the end of the war, he felt that they were just traitors and they were despicable. He also warned that, guess what? We're not going to have any overwhelming victories in this war, guys. It's not going to happen. He said the Rebs are too skilled to be gobbled up and bagged. Mm-hmm. So he's basically saying, we're going to do our best to win this. We're going to win this, but don't expect any slam dunks here. Every one of these battles, I've seen Antietam, I've seen South Mountain, I've seen Fredericksburg. These are ugly, ugly battles. And when he makes them back to camp, he's going to be made lieutenant colonel, right?
Yeah.
And although people talk, he went to Chancellorsville, and we're not talk too much about that. I think when people talk about Rufus Dawes, the thing they think about most is probably the Gettysburg campaign, right?
At the railway cut.
By the Gettysburg campaign, the Iron Brigade has 2,200 guys, and they're comprised of 5 regiments. The 2nd, 6th, and 7th Wisconsin, the 19th Indiana, and the 24th Michigan, right? Hooker's in charge at this point. And he liked Hooker, but he grew impatient with Hooker because he wasn't sure Hooker knew what the hell he was doing or where he was going at this point. By early June 1863, they were marching. They knew something was up, and they knew the Rebs were marching, but they didn't know where they were going. There were a lot of starts and stops where they were told, you're going to be up all night breaking down your tent. We're going to be leaving first thing in the morning. So they'd be up all night, they'd break their tent down, they'd be ready to go in the morning, and they'd sit there for 2 more days. Yeah. And they would just sit there. There was a lot of that, right? Hooker had this balloon, this recon balloon, that Dawes said was always up in the air. And they took that to mean that they have no idea where the Rebs are. Because it was always up. He was always up there looking. They couldn't find him.
I do feel bad for Hooker at this time, though, because he was going through a concussion.
He was. There's that backstory with that. But he certainly was. But the troops, although the mood was really, really good, they got the Corps badges, they got a better artillery system, they're getting fed, but they're still frustrated because now they know something's going on. And you know where they're getting all their information? The newspapers. That's how they're finding out. They're getting, newspapers being delivered by the messengers, headlines, rebels in Pennsylvania. And so what Dawes was afraid of was he was afraid of having to go back to Antietam and fight in that battlefield again, because that was a mental block for him. He writes about that battlefield. I never want to fight there again. The flower of our regiment was slaughtered in that cornfield. Yep. So he goes, this is all looking like this could happen again in Sharpsburg, right? On the 27th of June, back near South Mountain again, they're in that area. They keep moving. On the 28th, they find out Solomon Meredith is now in charge of the Iron Brigade. So that's how he ends up being in charge of that. It was right around here they get to Emmitsburg, Maryland, when they find out the news that George Meade's now in charge and Hooker is out. Now, Dawes was very lukewarm on George Meade. very lukewarm. He said, and I quote, Meade lacked the martial bearing of Joe Hooker. And the other thing that pissed him off is whenever Meade rode by in his horse, he pulled his hat down over his eyes so his troops couldn't see him. And he says it always bothered him. He says he did not want his soldiers to see his face. And they didn't know what the hell that was about, because he would come by and they'd cheer and he would just pull his hat down and didn't want to see him.
Maybe he was shy.
I don't know. Have you seen his face? I would be hiding it too. He's a guy who's wearing a mask every day. No, but seriously though, they took that to be, whether it be standoffish or what, but he wasn't Joe Hooker, and that was what bothered a guy like a Rufus Dawes, right?
Well, Joe Hooker was just so, like, as Dawes describes him, he's like, he is very arrogant. He's also he's got this zeal that brings that out, same thing out in the troops for re-inspiration, right? Like Dawes had seen him fight at Antietam as well. Like Hooker's wounded at Antietam too. And I think it was that Dawes is carrying with him how he re-inspired the Army of the Potomac with all those positive changes he made, right? He's carrying that with him.
I think Meade's biggest problem was that he wasn't Joe Hooker, right?
Yes, exactly.
And he wasn't George McClellan, right? Yeah. And I think anybody who was going to come along was going to be compared to one of those two guys, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's what it was, right?
Yeah.
So, but regardless, July 1st, 1863, Dawes is going to get orders to pack up and march immediately towards the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Okay, it's really early in the morning. Now, the 6th was the last to move in this brigade. They were the last ones. He had 340 men marching down the Emmitsburg Road, and they're all singing that song, The Campbells Are Coming. That's the song they were all singing. And they did that to show, as a show for the locals, basically. They were probably sitting at the Reliance Saloon, probably, as they were marching by, in the distance.
Great place to close out the night at, by the way.
Certainly is. But at this point, John Buford's cavalry is doing their thing west of town and north of town. They're doing the fallback thing. Stalling guys like James Archer and Joseph Davis. That's all going on really around that same time, right? As those guys are advancing on. Now, when they finally get to near the Cadore farm, they start to run across the field towards Seminary Ridge, where Solomon Meredith is going to tell them to form their line. At this moment, they're standing probably right around where the Seminary Museum door is, right around there. At that moment, Dawes is going to learn that Doubleday is in charge and that their corps commander, John Reynolds, is dead. He's going to find out. Now, they don't really tell anybody, but the 6th is going to be held in reserve by Doubleday. Doubleday is going to tell them to lay down on the reverse slope of the field between Seminary and Herbst Woods in the front. The Wisconsin troops, the rest of the Iron Brigade, the 19th Indiana, the 24th Michigan on the left, they're in those woods fighting those Carolinians, right? The 6th is lying on their stomachs, and they can't see it, but they can hear it. So imagine that little road that cuts in front, just between that and the museum, that's where they are, right? They're lying down in that reverse, so they're that close. While they're waiting there, they see a blanket go by with a body under it, and that's John Reynolds.
Yeah, I read that in his memoirs, and I was like, oh my God, that's crazy.
So around this time, they notice that the rebels are trying to get around their side. They're trying to flank them, and they're coming from the area of the Peace Light, right?
Yep.
And so they're coming down. So Doubleday is going to order the 6th Wisconsin to rise and double quick towards the Cashtown Pike. They're going to head down there, where those Rebs are trying to get behind the Iron Brigade guys in the woods, right? Now, at this moment, Dawes is still riding his horse. His horse is going to be shot in the chest, and he's going to survive. But the bullet went into his chest, 17 inches into the horse's chest. He lived, but this means Dawes is going to have to be riding on foot the rest of it with his troops. His horse, he can't use his horse anymore. The 6th Wisconsin is going to charge, and they're going to stop at that fence at the Cashtown Pike while the Rebs are running at them. He says that it looks like the earth swallowed them up whole, is what he said.
Yeah.
Because they all jumped into that unfinished railroad cut.
Yeah, and he describes that the fire that his men met going into this was murderous. And he said to climb that fence in the face of such fire was a clear test of mettle and discipline.
Yeah, Dawes has got the 95th New York on his left, along with the 14th Brooklyn, and he's going to tell a guy named Edward Pye, the major of the 95th New York, we must charge. And Pye looks at him and says, well, then charge it is.
Yeah,
that's the side. That's how they're going to do it.
Yeah, and Dawes describes the fire at the railway cut as an unbroken roar, and men were being shot by 20s and 30s and breaking ranks by falling or running. But the boys crowded in right and left toward the colors and went forward.
Well, what they were trying to do is the Rebs would come and volley and fight. Now, the railroad cut is, if some people it's chest deep, some people it's 10 feet over your head. But they would time it. Oh, for you, yeah. But what happens, the Rebs would fire a volley, and then the Union guys would run because they had to time it. Now, it's 180 yards between that road in the railroad cut, okay? The Union lost 180 guys. They lost 1 man per yard to get there is how they did it, right? And once they got there, a rebel color, a flag, was seized by a guy named Corporal Eggleston. He grabbed the flag, and a rebel pulled his gun and shot him on the spot for taking his flag.
Yep.
Now, to avenge him, a guy named Private Anderson, who was nicknamed Rocky Mountain Anderson, let you figure that one out on your own. Okay, he's going to smash the skull of that rebel with the butt of his musket.
Yeah,
for killing Eggleston, right?
Yeah.
And what's going to happen is a guy named Corporal Francis Waller is going to grab that rebel flag they were fighting over, and he's going to present it to his officers. And for that, he's going to get the Congressional Medal of Honor. So as we think about Charles Tilden, we don't leave that alone.
Yeah.
Okay. Dawes is going to tell the Rebs to, throw down your muskets, surrender, be fired upon. And Dawes is going to end up with 6 swords. And I guess he talks about how it was hard to carry them, because he was trying to walk, and they were falling as he was trying to walk.
Well, he didn't realize, because he said, I was so new in command, like he's almost kind of being naive about it, right? And this is the 2nd Mississippi that is surrendering to him. And he also says this: the coolness, self-possession, and discipline which held back our men from pouring in a general volley saved 100 lives of the enemy. And as my mind goes back to the fearful excitement of the moment, I marvel at it. But yeah, he's got these 6 swords, and he's like, what do I do with these?
So just imagine that. So the 6th Wisconsin, that's not just how it ends for them. They're going to end up going to Culp's Hill. Mm-hmm. They're going to, where Stevens Knoll is for the most part, and they're going to support the 12th Corps. While they're there, there's going to be a local woman named Sally Paxton, who's going to present Dawes with a bouquet of flowers for his bravery, who allegedly saw him at the railroad cut. I don't know where the hell she was watching this.
Yeah, geez. I've been to the railroad cut, and I would not want to be here during the battle, that's for sure.
But Dawes is going to write after the battle, he's going to write, God has preserved me unharmed at another desperate battle. Yep. He's going to spend his 25th birthday on July 4th burying the dead of the 6th Wisconsin, whose numbers are now below 200. Mm-hmm. So again,
50% casualty rate.
While this is all going on, he's going to end up becoming friendly back in Marietta, Ohio, with a woman by the name of Mary Gates.
Yeah.
Right around here, when I was writing her, it's kind of tough to determine how he ended up meeting her, because
he refers to her as my best girl in his letters.
Right. So she just kind of appears. They become quickly engaged. So on January 18th, 1864, he gets a furlough to return to Marietta to marry her, and they vacation in the lovely honeymoon destination of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Mary. That's where they go for their honeymoon.
Drank lots of beer.
So, certainly did. So, and to Mary's delight, he spent most of the honeymoon recruiting guys for his regiment.
So his work. I would have been thrilled with that too.
I'm sure that would have worked out pretty well for you, no question. But what's funny about this, though, while on his honeymoon, his horse with a bullet in it, he had, right? They're walking around the town in Milwaukee, and it's cold, and the horse slips on the ice, and he falls off the horse and sprains his ankle. This was the only wartime injury that he sustained in the entire Civil War.
Yep. And he
was on his honeymoon, right?
Oh my God. God, if it's on your honeymoon, you got to come up with a more creative story than your horse slipped on ice.
Who knows what they were into, but that's what happens. And because for that injury, he's going to get an additional 3 weeks of furlough to heal his ankle, is what's going to happen, right? So with his honeymoon over and his ankle healed, he's going to return to Culpeper, Virginia. And on March 22nd, he's going to go there, and he's going to join U.S. Grant's Overland campaign. Yeah. So the beat keeps going on. And this guy, wrong place, the wrong time. He's like the Charlie Brown of the Civil War.
Well, this is a guy that is in 20-some battles, and he never gets injured.
That's the thing, right? Except for the honeymoon horse. That was the only thing.
Honeymoon horse.
One thing you start to see is you notice he stops writing the letters to his mother now. And now he writes almost daily to Mary.
Yeah.
And you can tell he just left his new bride. He's back in war again. He's in the Overland campaign. You can see this melancholy and depression really kicking in now. All the bravado he had now in these letters of 61 and 62 is completely gone. Whenever he got a free time in Culpeper, you know what he did? There was a local guy, an elderly rebel. His name was Mr. Mossy. And you know what they did? He played chess with them every single day.
Wow.
I don't know if he was preparing for the big tournament with Claiborne later that year. Who knows what he was doing? But that's what he did. He just, with himself, he played. And so he just kind of would become separated. He became sort of distant. May 5th, 1864, Dawes and the rest of the army is going to march to the wilderness near the old Chancellorsville battlefield. Now, not long later, he's going to see James Wadsworth killed at Spotsylvania. But Dawes is going to live to fight another battle. So he's going to write to Mary, by the blessing of God, I am alive. I cannot avoid the probability of me coming out safely, or strongly odds are against me.
Yep.
And so he realized that it's just a matter of time. I mean, it's just the odds. As a matter of fact, the newspapers are starting to report that he's dead.
Yeah.
So the on May 15th, they report that he's dead. So he's going to write his wife around the same time. You cannot conceive of the suffering here. This is about Spotsylvania. Dawes was broken, and he was haunted by the fear of death and leaving his new bride, as well as the guilt of surviving so many battles while many of his friends died in front of him.
And he's not even getting
you can see what's going on.
Injured. You go back to what he thought and saw at Antietam with the guy's foot getting shot off, the guy's arms getting shot off right in front of his face. And he says that in his memoirs. It was right in front of my face. And, here he is in the Overland Campaign, and he tells his wife, I am sick with the horrors of war. It is impossible for one who has not undergone it to fully understand the depression of spirits caused by such long, continued, and bloody fighting and work. And at one point during the Overland Campaign, he's writing her, and he said, the bullets clip through the green leaves over my head as I lie behind the breastwork writing. I have had no full nights of sleep since May 7th, when I took command of the regiment. Day after day, night after night, we have marched, fought, and dug entrenchments. I have not changed my clothes since May the 3rd. We have not seen and seldom communicated with our wagon train. I have not the composure to write as the bullets are coming so thickly, and some poor wounded soldiers are near me. I can't imagine being her getting these letters, let alone him in this and writing them.
Well, back home, people are thinking he died.
Yeah.
His Henry Dawes, Rufus's father, read in the paper that his son had died.
Yeah.
And so he wrote to Salmon Chase asking to have Rufus's remains retrieved from Spotsylvania and returned to Ohio. The Malston Star newspaper in Wisconsin, they wrote, Lieutenant Colonel Dawes died as he lived, doing his duty. And he's still alive.
And Dawes is able to read this too.
Can you imagine?
I can't even imagine that. And, the other thing Dawes says of this campaign is he says, during the unexampled campaign of 60 continuous days, the excitement, exhaustion, hard work, and loss of sleep broke down great numbers of men who had received no wounds in battle. Some who began the campaign with zealous and eager bravery, ended it with nervous and feverish apprehension of danger in the ascendancy. Brave men were shielded if their records or other occasions justified another trial, which ordinarily resulted well, but cowards met no mercy.
I mean, to Dawes' credit, he's going to stick it out. He's going to stay with his army right up to the siege of Petersburg. He's going to be at the crater, but on August 10th, 1864, he's had enough, and he's going to be mustered out. Enough is enough, and he is done. So in the end, for Rufus Dawes, he fights in 20 plus battles, and his only injury was that sprained ankle in his honeymoon. Take this guy to Vegas, Mary, as far as how that works, right?
Exactly.
Now,
but that really weighed on him, though. That whole not getting injured is something that weighed. And you look at him, the whole not getting injured is weighing on him, because he's like, wow, I've seen my friends killed. Why wasn't I in their place is probably what he's thinking. And you can't imagine how many other men are probably thinking that too.
No doubt. I mean, the war is going to end. He and Mary are going to end up having 6 kids.
Yeah.
Okay. So including a son, Charles, who's going to later be the vice president under Calvin Coolidge. So he's going to continue that lineage, right? Rufus is going to open himself up a lumber business, and he's going to dabble in the growing railroad industry. He'll find himself serving a 1-year term in Congress in 1880, of all things.
Yeah.
He was offered a position as the minister of Persia in 1897 by President and fellow Antietam veteran and coffee chaser William McKinley.
Yep.
But he turned it down.
He
just the days of service were over for him.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about him is his body and mind were clearly sick, both of them.
Yep.
Around age 50, his health began to deteriorate. His body began to fall apart. He spent the final 7 years of his life in a wheelchair. He'll eventually die on August 2nd, 1899. At the age of 61, that's all he was.
Yeah, he's only 61 years old, and he's probably the first case. I shouldn't say first case. He's not, but PTSD is what he has.
He clearly did. He clearly did, and his body fell apart. And the thing about Rufus Dawes, in his memoirs are interesting. The final paragraph in his memoirs, I've read a lot of these memoirs, and what was unique about this one, the final paragraph was a paragraph written by him to himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he writes, a generous courage was spurred by ambitious hope, but you have lived to see spring up as the result of your suffering, trial, and victory, the most powerful nation in history, and the most beneficent government ever established. So he wrote that. Bottom line is they don't make Rufus Dawes anymore.
No.
They don't. They just don't. He was a guy who fought for his country, wanted to, out of pure patriotism. We talk a lot about John Bell Hood, is sacrificing his body for the altar of the Confederacy. You say that phrase all the time.
Yeah.
This is a guy who was sacrificing his body and mind and didn't even know it.
No.
Until it was all over.
No. And you see it slowly chipping away at him. And he writes his wife in December of 1881 because he's in Washington. He said, "I have today worshipped at the Shrine of the Dead. I went over to the Arlington Cemetery. It was a beautiful morning, and the familiar scenes so strongly impressed upon me during my young manhood were pleasant. Many times I went over that road, admiring the beautiful city and great white Capitol, while its then unfinished dome, going to hear the great men of the day in Congress. An ambitious imagination then builded castles of time when I might take my place there. Now at middle age, with enthusiasm sobered by the hard fights and hard facts, I ride, not run with elastic step over the same road, with this ambition at least realized, and with warmth enough left in my heart to enjoy it. My friends and comrades, poor fellows who followed my enthusiastic leadership in those days and followed it to the death, which by merciful providence I escaped, lie here, 24 of them, on the very spot where our winter camp of 1861-1862 was located. I found every grave and stood beside it with uncovered head. I looked over nearly the full 16,000 headboards to find the 24, but they all died alike, and I was determined to find all. Poor little Fenton, who put his head above the works at Cold Harbor and got a bullet through his temples, and lived 3 days with his brains out, came to me in memory as fresh as one of my own boys of today. Over their graves, I get inspiration to stand for all they won in establishing our government upon freedom, equality, justice, liberty, and protection to the humblest." So there he is, back at that camp from 1861, and you think about his attitude at the time. In 1861 was one of like, I want to go fight. I want to get in this. And he's back standing there in that same place where his friends are buried.
Yeah, absolutely. When he began fighting in 1861, he died at the age of 61. So life is circle, there's no doubt about it. So, but I think that's a good place to drop off. I think
so too. Yeah.
Good happy ending for you there. Good way to go. But I think it's a fascinating story because a lot of people, like you said before, know the Dawes story. They know the railroad cut. They maybe they know a little bit about about Antietam. But I think when you look at the overall picture of what he did, he's a fascinating study. He's an absolutely fascinating study.
He is, and I think you and I were talking like just yesterday about the fact that so Dawes is very open about his experiences where we don't have these experiences from every single soldier who fought and lived, right? Who didn't get injured in what they thought. But I think Dawes is their voice because Dawes is not the only one that had PTSD. We talked about William Rosecrans having it at Chickamauga, but how many of these other soldiers like Dawes had their experiences, didn't write them down, and were suffering with PTSD and going through the same thing that he did? So he's kind of their voice for the nameless and the faceless.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good point. So what's next, Mary? What's coming on the pike?
So our next episode is episode 69, which is going to be Sex in the Civil War.
Ooh, all right.
Yeah, ooh. And then we are going to have a meeting at Civil War Breakfast Club headquarters, probably with some IPAs, about what our episodes for January are going to be. But when this episode drops on December the 26th, you still have 3 days to sign up for our book club meeting on December the 29th with Kent Masterson Brown to talk about Retreat from Gettysburg. So if you would like to join us for that, even if you haven't read the book, 6 p.m. via Zoom, December the 29th, info@civilwarbreakfastclub.com, and we will send you an invite to that. Everyone is welcome.
Looking forward to it. All right. Well, everybody, thanks for listening. By the time this drops, Christmas will be in the past. Hope you had a great Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas and
great
Happy
holiday
New Year.
For those who celebrate, of course. So anyway, Mary, any final words from you, Fincheroo?
Well, thank you again for another year of awesome podcasting, because by the time our next episode drops, it will be 2022. You are the best co-host in the world. So thank you.
Thank you very
and
much.
Thank you to
I
our
resemble
listeners.
that comment. Thank you so much.
And thank you to our listeners, too, for being so supportive. And we've enjoyed getting to know a lot of you over the past we're going into our second year of doing this podcast. So it's really, really awesome. So thank you, everybody.
It's definitely a lot of fun. So thank you, Mary. Likewise, you are great as well. So everyone, thanks for listening. We appreciate it. Have a great holiday. Have a great weekend. We look forward to talking to you at our live on Monday night. Monday night live.
Raw. Yep. Monday, December 27th.
All right. Well, everybody, again, have a great time. Have a great weekend. Have a great holiday. We look forward to talking to you on Monday on the other side as we get ready for our next fun and exciting episode. So here's the Iron Brigade. Here's to Rufus Dawes. And here's to you, Fincheroo. And off we go.
See y'all later.
Peace out.
Bye, guys.